It began with a decision most people would never make, stepping into a desolate cemetery long after the world had gone silent. Not a casual stroll at dusk, or even the last hour of twilight, but precisely at midnight, when superstition claims the boundary between the living and the dead starts to blur. Some say nothing ever truly rests in these places, and for a moment, that idea flickered across my mind with a chill. I had come armed only with a flashlight and a thirst for answers about the whispered tales surrounding these grounds. A jagged moon hovered over the ancient headstones, offering just enough pale glow to illuminate the worn, moss-covered engravings at my feet. Every breath felt tight in my chest, as if the heavy night air had grown dense with secrets. I could almost sense a presence lurking at the edge of my vision, an unspoken warning that I wasn't alone. Maybe I should have turned back right then, but the urge to uncover the truth was too strong. Stories of flickering shapes drifting among the graves had followed this place for decades. I intended to find out if those were simply ghost stories or something far worse. They say the bravest explorers are also the most foolish. As I stood at the iron gate, I questioned which side of that coin I fell on. There was a distinct sense that crossing the threshold meant stepping into someone else's domain, a realm where the usual rules might not apply. Still, my feet moved forward. The old gate protested with a screech that cut through the stillness. My heart pounded like a warning drum, reminding me that living souls don't belong in the kingdom of the dead. Yet I walked right in, desperate to see for myself what happened here after midnight. Before I could get a firm grip on my courage, the gate slammed shut behind me. The echo shattered the quiet, the final seal on my escape route. The rational part of my mind insisted there was nothing to fear, just stones and earth. But logic stood no chance against the unnatural calm that made every hair on my neck stand up. I took a deep breath and forced one foot in front of the other, determined to peel back layers of myth and rumor. Little did I know, those silent monuments and crumbling mausoleums hid an unsettling history that many had tried to bury. I pressed on, flashlight trembling slightly in my hand, uncertain if it was from the cold night air or my own nerves. If there were indeed phantoms here, I intended to meet them, and perhaps break the barrier between old legends and modern reality. But with every small crunch of gravel beneath my steps, I felt the prickle of invisible eyes tracking my every movement. They seemed to say, "Turn back now," or witness things that might change you forever. Yet I did not turn back. Instead, I began to truly look, letting the hush of the graveyard speak for itself. That was the moment I realized I was not alone, and that some stories, once unleashed, refused to go quietly. The journey into the depths of this midnight cemetery had only just begun. To understand how this place came to hold such power, one must revisit its earliest days. The cemetery was established in the late 1800s, during a period of sweeping disease that claimed many lives in rapid succession. Because of the high influx of burials, the grounds quickly expanded beyond their original boundaries. Many of the deceased were interred without proper rites, fueling rumors that their spirits roamed restlessly at night. Locals said the funeral processions sometimes took place in haste, with final prayers half muttered over shallow graves. Worse still, there were hushed suggestions that not every coffin contained a body laid to rest with dignity. A series of misfortunes struck the small settlement around that time. Mysterious fires, unexplained disappearances, and suspicion fell on everything from curses to clandestine rituals. As a result, more and more whispered that the cemetery had become a magnet for malevolent forces. Some swore they saw moving lantern lights late at night, dancing along the tombstones with no human hand to hold them. Others claimed a low chanting echoed through the trees on certain moonless evenings, but no one ever dared investigate too deeply. Over the following decades, the cemetery became a place of dread. Townspeople avoided it whenever possible, especially after sunset. Occasional sightings of ghostly shadows, some described as tall and thin, others stooped and whispering, only reinforced its fearsome reputation. A few brave souls attempted to spend a night among the graves as a test of courage. Each time they returned pale-faced, muttering about strange breezes that carried indecipherable voices. One man was rumored to have collapsed in terror after seeing a dark shape flicker between the headstones. He refused to speak of the details, only shaking his head and cautioning others to stay far away. Those rumors persisted well into modern times, ensuring the cemetery's status as a forbidden ground. While technology advanced all around, the cemetery remained frozen in its own era, an isolated patch of land where old superstitions thrived. No matter how rational people claimed to be, few dared step beyond the wrought iron gates after dark. There was a collective understanding that something unexplainable lurked there, and so it stood, unloved and unvisited, except for those occasional wanderers who craved a brush with the unknown. With those tales still rattling in my mind, I took careful steps among rows of weathered markers. The moaning wind against the gnarled branches above seemed to carry the echo of old laments. I felt as though with every breath, I was exhaling warmth into a place that thrived on cold. My flashlight flickered across names and dates so old they had lost their shape. It was unsettling, being surrounded by the weight of so many lost stories. Yet an even greater heaviness pressed upon the air, as if the souls here were straining to tell their own truths, if only someone would listen. But listening to the long dead can sometimes uncover more than you bargained for. The deeper I wandered, the more I felt the ground itself pulsed with a quiet sorrow. I prepared myself for anything, knowing that some corners of the cemetery had never seen daylight, or so the legends went. All around me, the night stretched on, thick with foreboding. I only hoped I was prepared for what I might find here, in a place where history refused to sleep. My heart nearly leapt out of my chest when I heard the first odd sound, a soft scraping of gravel that didn't match my own steps. I froze, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The moon, half hidden behind clouds, threw fleeting patches of light on the ground. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker, a dark shape darting between two tombstones. I held my breath, leaning forward as if to catch any faint trace of motion. Nothing, only silence. Rational thought intervened, telling me it could be a stray cat or a nocturnal animal wandering among the graves. But a primal fear gnawed at my mind, whispering that this was something else, something with intent. I trudged forward, trying to keep my flashlight aimed steadily ahead. The beam trembled just enough to remind me how tense I was. A second scrape echoed to my left. I spun around but saw only the empty path behind me. The wind rustled and leaves swirled, but no obvious culprit appeared. Attempting to regain composure, I took a few careful steps toward a large, angelic statue perched on a raised slab. Its face was turned skyward, arms gracefully extended as if in eternal prayer. Yet in the gloom, the angel's marble features looked mournful, almost pained. Something about it gave me chills, like it was warning me of a presence I could not see. I paused, listening for any sound besides my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then came a faint tapping, like fingernails against stone. My gaze shot over to a towering obelisk in the distance. The atmosphere thickened. It felt like the oxygen in the air was dwindling. I noticed an unpleasant realization. I had ventured deep enough that the cemetery's entrance was hidden from view. If I tried to run, would I even find my way back? Even the paths were confusing in the half-light. My pulse raced, but curiosity propelled me forward. Some primal part of me screamed to flee, to ignore the questions in my mind. Yet I couldn't help wanting to see more. Perhaps it was the rush of adrenaline or the promise of unraveling a local legend that drew me onward. That was when I glimpsed another shape move behind a cluster of tombstones. Faster this time. I tried to keep my eyes on it, but it vanished in an instant. Was it a person, an animal, something else entirely? My instincts told me to be afraid, yet a stubborn determination stoked the fire in my chest. I pressed on, determined not to let my own fears overshadow the purpose of my midnight venture. Whatever lurked here, it seemed to watch from just beyond my flashlight's beam, observing me like a cautious predator sizing up its prey. At that moment, a random thought struck me. This was just the start. What greater disturbances might be waiting deeper within these grounds? The air was still, but the night was far from silent. As I passed a row of tall headstones, their inscriptions worn smooth by time, something began to whisper. At first, I thought it was just the wind catching on the jagged edges of stone, producing a hollow, breathy sound. But no, this was distinct. It had cadence, a rhythmic murmur threading through the darkness. My veins turned cold. Straining my ears, I couldn't make out the words, if they even were words. It sounded like a distant conversation spoken by a tongue not meant for human comprehension. My flashlight flickered in my trembling hand, spotlighting tufts of overgrown grass and the chipped corners of headstones. Each step forward seemed to amplify the whispers, swelling them into a faint chorus echoing all around me. I scanned the vicinity for any figure that might be producing this ghostly dialogue. Nothing was visible except for me and the solemn markers of the dead. Local tales had always mentioned voices. People claimed to hear pleading moans, sobbing, or frantic murmurs if they dared to trespass at night. I had scoffed at those stories, dismissing them as products of overactive imaginations. But now, confronted by the very phenomenon I'd once doubted, a wave of dread washed over me. The voice, if it was singular, morphed into multiple overlapping sounds. They seemed sorrowful, almost as though they carried the regrets of centuries past. My skin prickled and my mouth went dry. The unwavering presence of unseen watchers weighed heavily on me. Fear is a peculiar thing. It can either paralyze you or spur you into action. In that moment, it did both. My legs felt shaky, yet I moved, drawn further by a curiosity that soared above my own terror. With each footstep, the voices swelled, unifying into a faint moan. I had the creeping suspicion these were no living voices at all, but echoes of people long gone, trapped in a realm just out of sight. A lone branch snapped somewhere behind me. I spun to catch the cause, only to glimpse a fleeting shadow sliding behind a tall crypt. My heart hammered so violently I was sure it would burst from my chest. The crypt itself rose like a solemn sentinel among the graves, its iron gate rusted and half broken. If the shape I'd seen truly was a person, they were either unbelievably agile or not human at all. For a long moment, I debated whether to investigate the crypt or steer clear. The whispers seemed to guide me forward, as though pushing me to see something more. What was I seeking? Proof of an afterlife? Evidence of restless spirits? Perhaps I had only come to scare myself. The entire place felt like it was awakening, responding to my unwelcome intrusion. Despite every instinct telling me to run, I found myself slowly, inexorably drawn to that crypt entrance. The murmur in the air shifted, gaining a faint, sorrowful tone, like an orchestra warming up before a dirge. Even if it was only the wind, it brought tears to my eyes. This was no ordinary midnight. Something here was stirs beyond mortal explanation, and I was about to walk right into it. Crossing the threshold of that crypt felt like stepping into a different dimension. The air inside was thick, stale, and unwelcoming. My flashlight's beam fell upon scattered rubble and debris. Walls etched with unfamiliar symbols greeted me, a bizarre combination of religious icons and unrecognizable markings that seemed almost pagan. It was as if someone, or perhaps multiple individuals over the years, had used these walls as a canvas for cryptic messages or rites. One particular symbol caught my eye, a spiral with a jagged line through its center. Couldn't recall ever seeing anything like it, and a sudden sense of dread rose in my chest. It felt wrong, though I couldn't say why. My instincts warned me that such a mark was no casual graffiti. Could it be tied to the rumored rituals people muttered about? Dark ceremonies allegedly performed by those seeking communion with energies best left alone? Shifting my light toward the ground, I noticed a series of small tattered objects scattered near the back wall. They looked like remnants of candles or wax lumps melted into strange shapes. Broken glass jars, charred bits of cloth, even bone fragments, some clearly animal, others too splintered to identify. It reeked of attempts to contact or command forces beyond normal understanding. Was it old or recent? That was impossible to determine, but a coil of cold fear twisted through me, imagining what kind of scenes must have played out within these stony walls. Recalling local rumors, I remembered hearing whispers about missing pets, strange chanting at odd hours, and clandestine figures slipping in and out of the cemetery under the cover of darkness. Could these be the remnants of those secret gatherings? The objects here certainly hinted at something unnatural. My mind flashed to old tales of curses, conjurations, or attempts to raise restless souls. Perhaps these dark practices had stirred energies that now wandered these grounds, trapped and furious. I swallowed hard, reminding myself to stay calm. Yet there was a constant, low hum in my ears, part fear, part an unsettling vibration that seemed to resonate from the crypt walls themselves. Looking up, I noticed a word scrawled in spidery handwriting across a chunk of stone. It was partially eroded, but I could make out letters that spelled something akin to ALV, possibly the start of a name, or a warning. The remainder was too faded to decipher. A sudden tingle ran down my spine. Was I alone in the crypt? Every so often it felt as though a faint breeze drifted behind me, though there were no open windows or doors. Clenching my flashlight, I swung the beam around, half expecting to lock eyes with another presence. The only thing I caught was the fleeting glimpse of swirling dust. Still, the oppressive feeling persisted, so thick I could almost taste it. Then, without warning, something heavy scraped across the floor behind me, a coarse, grinding sound that made every muscle in my body seize with panic. I whipped around, shining the light frantically across the ancient stone. A large slab of rock near the entrance had shifted. Or had it? Doubt gnawed at me. Perhaps my frantic state was playing tricks. But if that stone had truly moved on its own, I wasn't sure I wanted to know what it might reveal. Stepping backward, I inched toward the crypt's exit, never letting my gaze waver from that spot. A thick sense of being unwelcome pressed on me like a suffocating hand. It was as if the ancient dead within these walls were letting me know that my presence was intolerable. Once beyond the threshold, I gulped in the open air, though it felt no less stifling. The crypt's secrets clung to my mind, urging me to question every step I took from here on. Even as I emerged back into the maze of headstones, I had the uneasy conviction that I'd left something awakened inside that crypt. And though I wanted to deny it, I couldn't shake the notion that my intrusion might have triggered something that wasn't meant to be disturbed. The chill that racked my body felt more intense now, creeping into my bones with every step. I passed rows of tilted, moss-encrusted markers, each bearing faintly visible names of the departed. Occasionally, a name would jump out at me, evoking a jolt of recognition. Remnants of local families whose surnames still populated the nearby town. A jarring reminder that these were once living, breathing individuals with histories of their own. Now they lay silent, their stories sealed beneath the ground. That was when I saw it, an indistinct figure standing near a particularly grand monument at the heart of the cemetery. My first instinct was to duck behind a taller gravestone, uncertain whether I'd stumbled upon another human visitor or something else. The figure seemed unnaturally still, draped in a shadow that defied the moonlight. My heart hammered. Could this be the presence I had been sensing all along? Summoning every shred of courage, I aimed my flashlight in its direction. The beam shook slightly, revealing the monument's elaborate carvings, cherubs and skulls intertwined in an unsettling dance. Yet the figure was gone, leaving only the empty space where it had stood. A wave of confusion swept over me. Had it vanished in the blink of an eye, or was my mind playing tricks? Trying to remain rational, I peered around. Perhaps it was an optical illusion, a trick of the shifting clouds overhead. But then I sensed it again, a subtle shift in the air behind me. Quickly, I pivoted, my breath caught in my throat. There, just a few paces away, stood a shadow, tall and vaguely human. I couldn't make out its features, but the tension that radiated from its form was unmistakable. My flashlight flickered, as if the batteries were suddenly failing. The figure seemed to flicker in tandem, like it was phasing in and out of solidity. In the stillness, the only sound was the thundering of my own pulse. For a terrifying moment, I was certain that whatever I was looking at was not of this world. Its outline trembled in the dim light, and a faint hiss escaped it, less of a voice and more a static-like rasp that set my nerves ablaze. Every muscle in my body urged me to run, yet some inexplicable fascination bound me in place. I managed to stutter out a feeble greeting, my voice cracking with fear. There was no response except a deepening of that intangible pressure that seemed to weigh down the night. Then, as though responding to an unseen command, the apparition glided backward, merging with the darkness beyond the next row of graves. Before I knew it, I was alone again, though the residual fear and confusion lingered in the air. I fought to gather my thoughts. Had I just witnessed a spirit, a residual haunting? Or was this entity something more malevolent, stirred awake by the energies discovered in the crypt? The sensation of eyes upon me was nearly unbearable, compelling me to keep looking over my shoulder. But each time I turned around, the landscape appeared deserted. My trembling flashlight offered me little solace. In the distance, I caught a faint glimmer, maybe moonlight reflecting off a polished tombstone. Then it moved. The realization sent a jolt through my entire body. This was no reflection. It was the figure again, half lurking behind a weathered statue. A sense of raw panic seized me. Still, I found the strength to step forward, wanting to see it clearly, wanting some kind of confirmation that my senses weren't lying. But just as before, it vanished into the gloom, leaving me shaking in place. I knew I was pushing my luck. Danger thrummed in the wind, an electric charge that told me I was trespassing in a realm not meant for mortal eyes. Part of me wanted to retreat, to break into a run and never return. Yet there was another part, equally strong, that demanded answers, no matter the cost. As I pressed on, a single question echoed in my mind. If this was only the beginning, what kind of revelation lay deeper within this haunted stretch of land? Pushing past the boundaries of fear, I soon came upon a section of the cemetery unlike the rest. The tombstones were older, more decrepit, set in a ring around a colossal tree with twisted, knotted roots. The branches loomed overhead like skeletal arms. Even the grass seemed scanty here, as if the earth itself recoiled from something unholy. My footsteps slowed as I approached the center of this forsaken clearing, where a single marble crypt stood with its door ajar. A dull glow seeped from inside, too faint to be artificial light. My pulse quickened. Could there be someone in there? Or something? My instincts told me to tread carefully, but I couldn't ignore the pull of that glow. Each step was measured, the crunch of gravel echoing in an unnatural hush. The air felt heavy, laden with a tangible sense of dread. Closer now, I peered into the crypt. A faint luminescence coated the walls, revealing inscriptions in archaic lettering. As my eyes adjusted, I spotted a shape in the corner, a figure hunched over, emanating a faint shimmer. Its back was turned to me, but I sensed it was aware of my presence. My throat constricted in sheer terror. Slowly, it began to turn. What confronted me was an appearance I still struggled to describe. Human-like but distorted, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. The glow wasn't around the figure, it was radiating from it, pulsing like an erratic heartbeat. I froze, pinned down by an unimaginable weight of fear. Though it had no lips that I could discern, I heard a low, resonant moan that sent spikes of horror through my very core. I don't know how I managed to remain upright. Perhaps it was adrenaline or sheer disbelief. We locked gazes, if those empty sockets could be called eyes, and time seemed to slow. In those brief seconds, I felt an onrush of emotion that didn't feel like my own. Sorrow, anger, betrayal. It was as though the entity was opening its memories to me, forcing me to experience the tragedies that had bound it to this wretched place. My surroundings blurred, replaced by scenes of long-ago funerals, grieving families, and even flickers of dark ceremonies performed under a moonless sky. I gasped, stumbling backward until I nearly toppled over a crumbling pedestal. Whatever this being was, it had endured a torment far beyond what a mortal mind could comprehend. Its sorrow was overwhelming. In a burst of desperate curiosity, I whispered a single question. "What do you want?" The figure twitched, and for a terrifying moment I thought it might lunge at me. Instead, it drifted closer, the glow intensifying, flickering like a candle in a draft. I braced myself, prepared for the worst. Then, in a hushed tone that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, I heard a single word: release. It echoed in my skull, resonating with the crypt's chill. Immediately, the air pressed down even harder, as though every molecule was charged with the entity's longing to be free from what, exactly? This place, this curse? The swirl of possible answers bombarded my thoughts, and I realized I might be in over my head. How could I release something that was bound to the threshold between life and death? Sweat beaded on my forehead. Part of me wanted to reach out, but primal fear anchored me. The entity's shape distorted, flickering wildly. Bits of the glow sparked off like embers floating in the breeze. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure backed away, dissolving into the gloom of the crypt. The sense of suffocation lifted slightly, leaving me gasping for air. I staggered out into the clearing, heart hammering so loud it drowned out any other sound. The revelation that there might be entire hosts of restless presences, all craving some kind of release, swirled in my mind. Was it possible the dark rituals performed here had trapped these spirits, chaining them to the cemetery's decaying soil? One truth was clear. This place was far more than a simple graveyard. It was a prison for souls caught in a limbo of pain and regret, and I'd ventured right into its heart. Every fiber of my being demanded that I leave, but my exit wasn't the triumphant stride of a conqueror. It was a frantic retreat, stumbling over uneven ground as I fought to recall the direction of the gates. The once familiar layout of the cemetery felt warped under the weight of my recent experiences. Headstones seemed to loom at impossible angles, and each passing crypt felt like it housed unseen watchers just waiting for me to falter. At last, I spotted the iron gate, faintly glinting under the moon, Relief flooded through me, but it was tinged with the relentless sense of dread that had taken residence in my chest. I pushed open the gate, half expecting a clang of protest to echo into the night, but the hinges were eerily silent. Felt like the entire cemetery watched in hushed stillness as I crossed back into the realm of the living. Once outside, I paused to catch my breath, glancing over my shoulder. For a second, the silhouettes of the tombstones seemed to shift, forming shapes that defied explanation. Then the wind picked up, rustling trees in a near symphonic wave, like a final farewell from the domain I'd just escaped. I knew I'd never be able to forget the presence of that crypt, the horrifying glow, and the sorrowful emptiness in those hollow eyes. People often say that encountering the paranormal can change your outlook on life and death. I stood there in the cool night, trying to process the swirl of emotions. Was I truly safe now? Or had something followed me out, clinging to my aura like a stubborn shadow? My pulse still throbbed with residual terror, and the hush of the surrounding fields only magnified the echoes of that single whispered word: release. In the days that followed, I couldn't sleep. I found myself replaying the events over and over, seeking some logical explanation. None came. Instead, I discovered more disturbing rumors about the cemetery's long, unsavory history. Ones involving clandestine gatherings, vanishings, and unmarked graves that never should have been dug. It seemed that each new piece of information only deepened my conviction that the cemetery was a nexus of energies too potent to be dismissed. And yet, for all my research, I found no surefire way to release the restless spirits tethered to that soil. Some said the land was cursed from the moment it was chosen as a burial ground, while others pointed to unscrupulous rituals performed by local cults in decades past. There was even a fleeting mention of a caretaker who might have tried to appease these spirits using old incantations, but no record of whether it succeeded. The caretaker, too, apparently vanished under suspicious circumstances. One question still plagues me. Was the entity I encountered the sole force haunting those grounds, or just a fraction of a larger, more malevolent presence? The memory of that crypt's interior still sends shudders through me. I can't help but wonder if there are more sealed rooms, hidden tunnels, or secret catacombs that house equally tormented souls. Each time I recall that swirling glow, I'm reminded that some truths are best left buried. Still, a small, defiant spark in my heart insists that no soul should be doomed to wander in torment. If there's a solution, it likely rests in unveiling the cemetery's darkest secrets, a task I'm not sure I'm brave enough to undertake. Yet the weight of those sorrowful eyes haunts me, beckoning me to return. For now, I share this story not to incite reckless curiosity, but to issue a warning. If you ever find yourself wandering among the dead, especially in a place steeped in whispered horrors, be prepared for the possibility that something might notice you. And if it does, you may never truly walk away alone. The gates slammed behind me like a final decree, cutting off whatever was stirring in that unholy ground. But I left a part of myself behind. There are places in this world where the boundary between reality and the beyond is thin, and once you've crossed into them, some part of you remains entwined forever. So the next time you pass by an old cemetery and feel that strange tingle at the base of your spine, listen carefully. The dead may call out from behind the veil, longing to be heard, and if you answer, you just might find yourself caught in their realm, long after midnight, with only the moonlight to guide you. Thanks for watching, guys. If you've got any thoughts or experiences you'd like to share, please leave them in the comments below. And if you're looking for more adventures like this, be sure to check out my other videos in this channel.